So anyway, I'm going to try to make this quick. I'm basically checking in, and I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first book that I read so far this month is Beauty in the Blood by Charlotte Carter. Here's a picture of the author. As you guys may or may not know, as my tenure here on the YT, Charlotte Carter is best known for her Black Mystery series, or trilogy actually, featuring a woman named, I believe her name is Nadine. Nadine is a character who goes between New York as well as Paris, and between the three books that are presented for her to solve her particular crimes, three respective crimes. But this right here is different. It's outside of this author's normal mystery because it's much more horror, but it has some mystery elements to it as well. So to go ahead and give the synopsis, there's three things you want to keep note of. Three things, three perspectives. The first one is that of a woman named Yvonne. Yvonne once was a prison guard who is, retired, but she's suddenly tapped on the shoulder by one of her former inmates to investigate the murder of her brother. Taking place in New York. Her brother was in a high-rise building. He jumped from a window, supposedly jumped. And so, that is where the former inmate tells Yvonne, please solve my brother's murder, etc., etc. Yvonne is, of course, reluctant to do this because she has made a life as a chef, for herself. But she gets pulled into the murder. The second narrative you got to keep an eye out for is a woman named Sarah. Sarah's a beautiful black lady. She's light skinned, has beautiful hair, all the the hallmarks of someone who is just kind of has the ability to transfix people. I guess you can say. I don't know how to really put this because that her looks is part of her aura and part of her nature as a character who is hosting this very dark entity. Despite all of this, Sarah is a very successful woman. She's a lawyer, but she does have this sort of entity inside of her that is drawn to a very specific genotype that she traces each individual who has that particular gene throughout the city of New York to murder them. She's not quite a succubus, not quite a vampire, of course, but there's some tellings of that's kind of how the easiest way to kind of view her is as a succubus. Interestingly enough, she reminded me of this character in a movie that terrified me as a child. The movie was called Tempted by Temptation, which probably would scare me now still, where there was this woman who was a black succubus going about the nightclubs and bars, drawing men in and murdering them subsequently. Interestingly enough, the lady who played the succubus in that movie is actually Cynthia Bond, and she is the woman who wrote the book Ruby, just to keep that note ahead. So the third narrative point that we have to follow within this story takes us back to like the post-Civil War, where we're following, the emancipation of slaves. So we're following this troop of ex-slaves who are traveling north, and they get into a variety of different challenges along that road. But because this takes place centuries after before this particular story of Yvonne and Sarah, this story illustrates or shines a light on what are the origins behind the entity that resides within Sarah and its particular mission. So Beauty in the Blood is completely outside of what Charlotte Carter normally is known for when it comes to mysteries. And I have to say that I kind of looked at this book from two perspectives. Both from, there was a fair amount of procedural when it comes to like Yvonne getting in contact with police officers and various professors who knew about the folklore behind each of these different murders, what they kind of reflected. And then there's the horror where we're on the scene with Sarah, who goes on the hunt for these various victims that she draws in and subsequently murders. By the end of the book, you do see the entity up front, and it was very disappointing in a whole roundabout way, because a lot of what this book had me doing as a reader was suspending my disbelief in a lot of different areas, especially when it came to the procedural aspects with Yvonne's perspective. There was a lot of sort of begging for me to make myself understand why some of the choices that these characters made in trying to solve this crime were being made. Even with some of the directions that the police officers that Yvonne was getting involved with was very much questionable. But nevertheless, to me, that part kind of just read mostly like a movie in a lot of ways. But pointing back to the aspect of the entity that resides within Sarah, and her quote unquote succubus flavor of doing things, that was disappointing as well, because I still did not quite understand where this creature came from, despite the author telling us in the post Civil War portions of the book. It's still, none of it's still connected with me. Like, none of it's still connected with me. I just didn't see the gravity of why this particular creature resided within this woman from generation to generation, seeking a very specific other lineage to murder each generation, previous and before, and so forth and so on. So none of that kind of landed with me. But I will say that ultimately I enjoyed the book because it did kind of like read like a movie in a lot of ways. So although I was kind of confused a lot in a lot of areas, I was suspending my disbelief in a lot of areas. I was still left with lingering questions and wonder, and not fully satisfied by some of the explanations that some of these characters came up with, and as well as the resolution. I still enjoy reading the book because it did keep me gripped and reading and wanting more, because like I said, when it comes to like images and pictures in one's head, it did read like a movie to me. So that was kind of fair. I'll give that a fair assessment, if you will. So Beauty and the Bud, I finally read this book, and if Miss Carter comes out with another book, I would easily pick up another one by her. So it just almost hit the mark. Just almost hit the mark.